You ever take a job that just feels off right from the first handshake? Like the money's way too good for what they're asking, and you know you should probably have a million questions, but this weird feeling in your gut tells you to just shut up and take it. Yeah, that was me. I got hired as the night guy for this old wax museum, the Morningwood Emporium. It's this forgotten place on the edge of town, been shut down for like a decade. They told me my job was simple. Keep kids from breaking in and messing the place up, but that was a total lie. The real job, the one I had to figure out surrounded by all that creepy silence, wasn't about protecting the museum from people. It was about protecting people from the museum. Look, I was broke, end of story. I was out of options, my landlord was starting to make calls, and this ad just popped up. Night security needed, solitary assignment, generous compensation. The interview, if you can even call it that, was with this dude, Mr. Sterling. He was cold as ice, didn't care about my resume, didn't ask a single question about my past jobs. He just slid the contract over, tapped his finger on the salary, which was, no joke, more than I'd ever made, and laid out the rules. Just 3 of them, he said. Take it or leave it. Rule 1, I had to do a full patrol, a walkthrough of the entire place, at the top of every hour, exactly on the hour. He said it was for the insurance company. Rule 2, never, and he really stared at me when he said this, never turn your back on the Founders Hall. If I had to leave that room, I had to walk out backwards. He didn't say why, just mumbled something about respect. Then he gives me rule number 3, and this is when he leans in, his voice gets real low, and the little hairs on my arm start tingling. He says, if anyone, a teenager, a drunk, doesn't matter. If anyone actually gets inside, your only job is to get them out before the sun comes up. Don't fight them. Don't call the cops. Your only goal is to make sure they leave. Got it? What was I going to say? I said yes. My first night there was just weird. The silence in that place was heavy, you know? The kind that pushes in on you, makes your own breathing sound like a damn hurricane. The whole museum smelled like dust and mothballs, with this weird, faint, sweet smell underneath it all, like old perfume. Every time my flashlight beam hit one of those wax figures, I'd jump. Their glass eyes just seemed to follow me from the shadows. And right at the entrance to that creepy Founders Hall, there was this plaque with a quote from the guy who built the place, Alistair Blackwood. I'll never forget what it said. Wax captures a moment, but a soul can be trapped for an eternity. I told myself it was just spooky nonsense to scare tourists. For the first few hours, I just sat in the little security office, trying to read a book, but I couldn't focus. The quiet was too loud. So 2:00 a.m. hits, and I head out for my 3rd patrol. I'm doing the walkthrough, same as before. Past the old-timey presidents, the forgotten movie stars, I walk backwards out of the Founders Hall, feeling like a total idiot. I'm heading down the last hallway, this section they called the infamous gallery, with all the famous criminals, when I hear something. It's not a footstep or a creak. It's this dry, whispery sound, like someone dragging a bag of sand across the floor. It came from behind me. I just froze. Every muscle in my body went tight. I spun around, pointing my flashlight back the way I came. Nothing. Everything was dead still. The figures hadn't moved. Well, almost all of them. The wax figure of H.H. Holmes. I swear to you, I would bet my life on this. When I walked past him a minute ago, he was looking straight ahead. But now, his head was tilted, just a little, and his creepy dead glass eyes were looking right at me. I just stood there for what felt like an hour, staring at that thing. My flashlight was shaking in my hand, making the shadows dance all around it, and my brain was just screaming, "Run!" But my feet were glued to the floor. I tried to rationalize it. The building is old, right? The floor is probably not level. Maybe it just settled, shifted a little. A vibration from a truck passing outside. Anything. I was desperately trying to find an explanation that didn't involve a wax statue of a serial killer deciding to check me out. So I did the dumbest thing I could have possibly done. I walked towards it. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs. I reached out a trembling hand and I touched its face. It was cold, waxy, and felt horribly like old dead skin. With a deep breath, I grabbed its head and slowly, deliberately, turned it back to face forward. The movement was stiff, and I swear I heard a faint cracking sound from inside its neck. I didn't wait for a thank you. I practically sprinted back to the security office and locked the door behind me, which was pointless because it's a cheap office lock, but it made me feel a tiny bit better. The rest of that first week was hell. I didn't see anything else move, but that almost made it worse. Now I knew what the silence was hiding. Every patrol was a nightmare of paranoia. I'd walk the halls with my back scraping against one wall so nothing could be behind me. I measured the position of the statues with my eyes, memorizing where their hands were, how they were looking, just waiting to catch them slipping up again. The Founders Hall became this place of absolute terror for me. Walking backwards out of that room, with all those unblinking glass eyes watching my retreat, felt less like a rule and more like a basic survival instinct. By the time the sun started to rise each morning, I'd be a wreck, completely drained and shaking from the constant adrenaline. I thought about quitting every single day, but then I'd think about my empty bank account and the weirdly generous paycheck, and I'd convince myself to go back for one more night. It was on a Tuesday, 2 weeks into the job, that it finally happened. I was in the office watching the monitors when a flicker of movement on camera 4, the one covering the back alley, caught my eye. A pair of figures dropped down from the fire escape. Teenagers. A guy and a girl, probably 16 or 17. The guy pulled out a crowbar and started working on the rear entrance. My first instinct was to grab the phone and call the cops. It's what any normal security guard would do. But then I heard Mr. Sterling's voice in my head, cold and clear. Your one and only priority is to ensure they leave. I just sat there, frozen, watching them. After a minute, there was a loud crack and the door swung open. They were in. The girl pulled out her phone and started recording, laughing as they stepped into the darkness. I watched them on the monitors as they moved from room to room. They were acting exactly how you'd expect. Giggling, taking selfies with the presidents, pretending to be scared in a loud, obnoxious way. "Ooh, look at this creepy old dude," the girl said, poking the wax figure of a stern-looking judge. The guy put his arm around a flapper from the 20s and made a kissing face at his phone. They were just dumb kids looking for a story to tell their friends. But I was watching them with a feeling of absolute gut-wrenching dread. They were ants, marching obliviously towards a spider's web, and I was the guy who was paid to just sit and watch. They kept moving deeper, further from the exit, their laughter echoing faintly through the building's audio system. Then I saw them turn towards the entrance of the Founders Hall. "Hey, let's check out this room," the guy said. "Looks important." My blood went cold. "No, no, no," I whispered at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. They walked in, the camera in the hall tracking their movements. For a moment it was just more of the same, and then the monitor for the Founders Hall flickered. Once, twice. The girl's laughter cut off mid-sound. Through the crackling audio feed, I heard her say, "Whoa, did you feel that? It's like freezing in here all of a sudden." The guy told her not to be a baby, but then the monitor flickered again, more violently this time, and a low hum started coming through the speaker. It was a deep resonant sound, almost too low to be a noise. You felt it more than you heard it. The kids were gone from the camera's view, deeper in the hall. The hum grew louder, and then, with a final violent crackle, the screen went black. Just a wall of hissing white and grey static. They were in there, and the camera was dead. For about 10 solid seconds, I just stared at the static on that screen. My brain literally short-circuited. I was clicking the mouse, switching between cameras, hoping it was just a technical glitch, a loose wire, anything. But every other camera was crystal clear. Only the Founders Hall was gone. The low hum I'd heard through the audio feed was gone too, replaced by a hissing silence that was 1,000 times worse. My hands were slick with sweat. Those kids were in there. They were in the one room Mr. Sterling had a specific, insane rule about, and the power was out. I could feel the building around me. It felt awake, alert, like a predator that had just caught a scent of blood. Every second that ticked by felt like a lifetime. My mind was screaming at me, replaying Sterling's warning on a loop. Do not engage. Your only job is to ensure they leave. But how was I supposed to do that sitting in a chair 100 feet away, staring at a dead monitor? I kept picturing their faces, laughing and oblivious on my screen just minutes earlier. They were just dumb kids. They didn't deserve this, whatever this was. I imagined the police report. 2 teenagers go missing inside a locked museum, and the security guard says he just sat in his office all night. I was screwed. No matter what I did, I was absolutely, completely screwed. I could follow the rules and let whatever was in that hall have them and live with that for the rest of my life. Or I could break the rules, go in there myself, and probably end up right alongside them. For a few minutes, I honestly just wanted to run. Just bolt out the front door, get in my car and drive until I ran out of gas, but my feet wouldn't move. My conscience, or maybe just my terror of being labeled an accomplice to a disappearance, had me chained to that spot. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were filled with wet cement. I grabbed my flashlight, the big, heavy metal one that could probably crack a skull if you swung it hard enough. Not that I thought it would do any good against whatever was in there, but holding it made my hand shake a little less. Leaving the security office felt like stepping off a cliff. The air in the main museum felt colder, heavier. The silence was different now too, it was listening. I could feel it. As I walked, I kept my flashlight beam pointed straight ahead, refusing to look at the other figures lining the halls. I didn't want to see if any more of them had decided to get a better look at the night's entertainment. The walk to the Founders Hall was the longest walk of my life. Every floorboard that creaked under my boots sounded like a gunshot. When I got to the entrance of the hall, the big oak doors were slightly ajar. I stopped, holding my breath, trying to hear something from inside. I expected to hear screaming or crying, or even just panicked whispers, but I heard nothing like that. What I heard made my blood freeze in my veins. It was music, a faint tinny waltz like it was being played on an old hand-cranked gramophone. It was a beautiful, elegant melody, the kind you'd hear in a black and white movie, and it was the single most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It had no business being there. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I knew I had to go in. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I pushed the door open just a crack and peered inside. The room was black, a deep, unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. The waltz was coming from the center of that blackness. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white line through the dark, and I found them. The 2 teenagers. They were standing in the middle of the room, their backs to me. They weren't fighting or crying. They were just standing there, swaying, holding each other in a classic dance pose, moving slowly in perfect time to the ghostly music, their heads tilted as if resting on invisible shoulders. Their eyes were wide open, but they were blank, like dolls' eyes. And then I saw it. As my light held steady on their swaying forms, a third pair of hands slowly entered the beam of light from the darkness behind them. The hands were pale, long, and looked waxy, almost like they belonged to one of the figures, and they were gently, possessively resting on each of the teenagers' shoulders. I'm not proud of this, but the second I saw those waxy hands, I flinched back so hard I stumbled, and the heavy oak door slammed shut with a boom that echoed through the entire museum. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I just stood there in the hallway, panting, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. The ghostly waltz music was gone. The silence that rushed in to take its place was thick and menacing. My mind was a useless whirlwind of terror. The hands. They looked exactly like the hands on the other wax figures. Were the statues moving? Was that what this was? And the kids, just swaying in the dark, completely empty. The third rule, Sterling's most important rule, was screaming in my head. Ensure they leave. It felt like an impossible command, like being told to walk into a lion's cage and politely ask it to give back its dinner. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door, trying to get myself under control. Quitting was no longer an option. Running was no longer an option. I couldn't leave them in there. Taking a shaky breath, I grabbed the big, cold iron handle and pulled the door open again, slowly this time. The darkness inside was waiting. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking, sounding like a scared kid. "You two, the party's over. You gotta get out of here now." Nothing. No response. just my own pathetic voice getting swallowed by the gloom. I knew it was useless. They couldn't hear me. They weren't really there anymore. I was going to have to go in and get them. As I took the first step over the threshold, a blast of Arctic cold air hit me so hard it felt like a physical punch, knocking the breath from my lungs. And as my second foot cleared the doorway, the massive oak door swung shut behind me. Boom! The sound was final, a lid being sealed on a coffin. I was trapped. I was in the lion's den. My flashlight beam was the only thing that existed in the universe, cutting a frantic path through the suffocating black. I moved towards the center of the room, towards the kids. They were still standing there, motionless now that the music was gone. As I got closer, I could see the boy's jaw was slack, his head lolling slightly to one side. The girl's face was a perfect, porcelain blank mask. I reached out and grabbed the boy's shoulder. It was colder than ice. "Come on!" I yelled, shaking him. "Wake up! We have to go!" The moment my hand made contact, the air changed. It started with a whisper, a single, faint whisper that seemed to come from all around me at once. Then another joined it, and another. Within seconds, the room was filled with a chorus of overlapping whispers, a storm of voices speaking in languages I'd never heard, ancient and guttural sounds that scraped at the inside of my skull. And through that chaotic storm of sound, one voice cut through, clear and calm. It was an aristocratic voice dripping with contempt and amusement, and it knew my name. "Leonard," it said, the voice echoing in my head as if spoken directly into my ear. "You should have stayed in your office," I screamed. I couldn't help it. I stumbled back, dropping my hand from the boy's shoulder and swinging my flashlight beam wildly around the dark room, searching for the source of the voice. The whispering grew louder, angrier. My light flashed over the faces of the figures in the hall, the stern founders of the city, their wives in their decaying finery, all of them seeming to grin at me from the darkness. I was looking for anything, for a person, a shape, something to explain the voice. My panicked beam finally landed on the main display at the far end of the hall, a large, ornate, throne-like chair where the centerpiece of the collection was supposed to be, the wax figure of the museum's founder, Alistair Blackwood himself. The figure was there, sitting in the chair just as it always was, but it wasn't wax anymore. I could see it clearly in my light. The skin had a pale, fleshy texture, riddled with faint blue veins. The hard glass eyes I had seen before were gone, replaced by dark, wet, intelligent orbs that were blinking slowly, adjusting to my light. They were staring right at me. And as I stood there, paralyzed in pure, mind-shattering horror, a slow, thin, impossibly cruel smile spread across Alistair Blackwood's face. For a second that stretched into an eternity, my entire world was just that smiling face, the living, breathing face of Alistair Blackwood. My flashlight beam trembled, but I held it steady on him. The cacophony of whispers died down, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. The real Alistair Blackwood rose slowly from his throne, the movement fluid and graceful, not like a dusty old corpse, but like a king surveying his domain. The air grew so cold that I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my light. He took a single, silent step forward. "How you have broken the rules, Leonard," his voice echoed in my head again, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "These two are my guests. They appreciate the history of this place. They have agreed to stay. A new, special exhibit." As he spoke, I glanced at the kids. They hadn't moved, but a faint, serene smile had appeared on their faces, mirroring the one on Blackwood's. They were being collected, and I was next. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but there was nothing. It was a tomb. And then I remembered the rules. Not just the third rule, but the second one. Never turn your back on the Founders Hall. Why? I'd thought it was about respect, but that was a lie. Everything was a lie. It wasn't about respect, it was about power. You don't turn your back on a predator. You don't show it you're afraid. You don't give it the satisfaction of watching you flee. That's when I knew with a sudden, terrifying clarity what I had to do. I couldn't fight him, but maybe I could insult him. Maybe I could break his concentration. I aimed my flashlight beam directly into his dark, wet eyes. He recoiled slightly, his smile tightening into a snarl. "Hey, I yelled, my voice shaking but loud. I wasn't talking to Blackwood. I was talking to the kids. Your phone, you dropped your phone, it's still recording. All your followers are watching this. It was a stupid, desperate lie, but it was a lie from their world, not his. For a split second, I saw a flicker of confusion in the girl's blank eyes. The serene smile on her face faltered. It was a crack in the porcelain. It was enough. Blackwood let out a roar of pure rage, not a sound in my head, but a real physical sound that shook the very foundations of the room. He lunged forward. "Get out! Run!" I screamed, finally breaking my paralysis. I leaped towards the kids, grabbing their cold, stiff arms. I didn't try to pull them. I spun them around, forcing them to turn their backs on the enraged figure of Blackwood. The moment they were no longer facing him, it was like a switch was flipped. They gasped, their bodies going limp for a second, before their own survival instincts kicked in. They stumbled forward, clumsy and dazed, like people waking from a deep trance. I shoved them towards the door, then took a step back myself, keeping my light trained on Blackwood, who was now just a furious shape in the darkness. I walked backwards, out of the hall, out of his domain, until the heavy oak door slammed shut between us. The kids collapsed in the hallway, shivering and crying, asking what happened. They didn't remember anything after entering the hall. I didn't try to explain. I just told them the place was structurally unsafe, that they were lucky to be alive and that they needed to leave before I called the cops. I herded them out the same back door they'd broken in through and watched them sprint off into the safety of the pre-dawn light. I had done it. I had followed the third rule. I went back to the office, my whole body shaking, and waited for the sun to rise. I called Mr. Sterling the second my shift ended. I was ready to quit, to yell, to curse him out. But his voice was perfectly calm. "Did they leave the premises, Leonard?" he asked. I told him yes. "Excellent," he said, and I could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Your weekly payment has been processed. We'll see you again tonight." And then he hung up. And that's when I finally understood the job wasn't temporary. It was a life sentence. The high pay wasn't for being a security guard. It was blood money. It was payment for being the unwilling janitor of a supernatural prison. My job is to walk these halls, to feel the eyes of the collection on me, and to wait for the next set of victims. My job is to lead the lambs back out of the slaughterhouse, so the butcher can be ready for another night. I'm not here to protect the museum from the outside world. I'm here to protect its secret from the outside world. I'm just another part of the system, resetting the trap night after night. I'm as much a part of this collection as the figures themselves. So do you really think that's just a story? When you drive past that old forgotten building on the edge of your town, the one with the boarded up windows and the faded paint, are you absolutely certain you're the only one looking at it? Or is something inside looking back, just waiting for you to get curious?
If you enjoyed this creepy story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales every week. Stay spooky!